The story that you are about to hear is a compilation of documented true facts, featuring characters, events, or places that has played a role in shaping history. Please sit back and listen as I recite this narrative for you. Velvalee Dickinson was convicted of espionage against the United States on behalf of Japan during World War II. Known as the Doll Woman, she used her business in New York City to send information on the United States Navy to contacts in Argentina via steganographic messages. She was finally caught when one of her contacts in Buenos Aires moved and her messages were returned. Born as Velvalee Malvina Blucher in Sacramento, California on October 12, 1893, to Otto and Elizabeth Blucher or Blucher. After graduating from Leland Stanford Junior University, colloquially known as the Farm, she worked in social services where she assisted Japanese families, and later, she became a bookkeeper for an agriculture brokerage firm located in the Japanese community of the Imperial Valley, where she met her soon-to-be husband, Lee Dickinson. It was during this time that she and her husband joined several Japanese societies with the stated purpose of promoting an awareness and appreciation of Japanese culture. In the late 1920s to the mid-1930s, Dickinson was employed in a brokerage company in San Francisco, California, owned by her future husband, Lee T. Dickinson. Shortly after her marriage, Dickinson worked as a social worker in the area until 1937. The FBI later also determined that she had made frequent visits to the consulate, attended important social gatherings at which Japanese Navy members and other high Japanese government officials were present, and entertained many Japanese people in her home. She frequently wore authentic Japanese dresses and had a vast collection of author-signed Japanese books, musical recordings, and Japanese jewelry. In 1937, Mrs. Dickinson and her husband moved to New York City, where she obtained employment as a doll saleswoman in a department store until December 31, 1937. Mrs. Dickinson then began operating her own doll store, first at her residence at 680 Madison Avenue, then at a separate store at 714 Madison Avenue, where she operated for several years until she moved the store down the block to 718 Madison Avenue in October 1941. In New York, she quickly joined the Japanese societies as well as several professional doll collecting organizations. Her clientele, which eventually numbered up to 20,000, included movie and Broadway stars, assorted social celebrities, politicians, as well as affluent men and women of the carriage trade. The prices she charged these collectors for her highly sought-after dolls started at a minimum of $25, with some of the rarer dolls fetching well into the thousands of dollars. The Dickinson doll shop catered to affluent collectors throughout the United States and overseas interested in obtaining foreign, regional, and antique dolls. Lee Dickinson assisted his wife's business by handling the accounting until his death on March 29, 1943. Dickinson was extremely proficient at marketing, and she frequently wrote for publication articles pertaining to dolls. She traveled around the country giving talks about doll collecting. She advertised regularly in the doll magazines and, in short, quickly became known as an expert in the doll collecting world. In February 1942, a letter was brought to the attention of the FBI, intercepted by wartime censors. The letter, supposedly from a woman in Portland, Oregon, to a correspondent in Buenos Aires, discussed a wonderful doll hospital and noted that the writer had sent the correspondent 3 old English dolls for repairs. The letter also mentioned fish nets and balloons. FBI cryptographers examined the letter, concluding that it was likely that the dolls in question were 3 warships and that the doll hospital was a West Coast-based shipyard where repairs were made, while the fishing nets and balloons disclosed information about coastal defenses and other critical information on the West Coast. Based on the above letter, the FBI initiated an espionage investigation. During that time, 4 more letters were sent to the same Buenos Aires address, a Señora Inés Lopez de Molinari at 2563 O'Higgins Street. However, the letters were returned to sender due to address unknown. These letters were delivered to postal authorities and in turn handed over to the FBI. The people whose names had appeared on the envelope as senders stated that while the letters contained information that was correct to their personal lives and hobbies, and that the signatures on stated letters resembled theirs, all 4 vehemently denied that they had sent any of the letters to the Argentine address. One of the letters, supposedly sent by a Mary Wallace of Springfield, Ohio, did indicate her home address, 1808 E High Street, but had been postmarked in New York, a place she had never been. The letter, primarily discussing dolls, contained references to a Mr. Shaw who had been ill but would be back to work soon. The letter corresponded to information that the destroyer USS Shaw, which had been damaged in the Pearl Harbor attack, completed repairs on the West Coast and was soon to rejoin the Pacific Fleet. Another letter, given to the FBI in August of that year, and said to have been written by a woman in Colorado Springs, Colorado, was postmarked from Oakland, California. That letter, written in February, referred to 7 small dolls which the writer stated would be altered to look as though they were 7 real Chinese dolls, designed to mimic a family of parents, grandparents, and 3 children. The FBI determined that the letter was written shortly after a convoy of ships had arrived at the Mare Island Naval Shipyard in Vallejo, California. The letter contained certain details about the ships that, if made public, would have been detrimental to the war effort. The same woman also gave the FBI a letter returned to her by the post office earlier that month. The second letter, from May and postmarked from Portland, Oregon, discussed the acquisition of a Siamese temple dancer doll. A portion of the letter read, "It had been damaged, that is tore in the middle, but it is now repaired, and I like it very much. I could not get a mate for this Siam dancer, so I am redressing just a small plain ordinary doll into a second Siam doll." Cryptographers determined this to translate as, "I just secured information on an aircraft carrier warship. It had been damaged, that is torpedoed in the middle, but it is now repaired. They could not get a mate for this, so a plain ordinary warship is being converted into a second aircraft carrier." This letter had been written a few days after the aircraft carrier, USS Saratoga, left Puget Sound for San Diego. Still another letter was turned over to the FBI by a Spokane, Washington woman, this one carrying a Seattle, Washington postmark. The letter referred to a German bisque doll dressed in a hula grass skirt, which was reported to be in Seattle for repairs scheduled for completion by the first week in February. A check by the FBI with naval authorities verified the conclusion that the doll referred to a warship which had been damaged at Pearl Harbor. The vessel was in Puget Sound Navy Yard for repairs at the time the letter was written. A forensic examination of all 5 letters confirmed that the signatures on the letters were not genuine, but were forgeries, which the experts decided were prepared from original signatures in the possession of the forger. The examination also showed that the typewriter used in the preparation of the letters was different in each case, but that the typing characteristics indicated that the letters were prepared by the same person. The conclusion reached by the FBI cryptographers was that an open code was used in the letters, which attempted to convey information on the U.S. Armed Forces, particularly the ships of the U.S. Navy, their location, condition, and repair, with special emphasis on the damage of such vessels at Pearl Harbor. The Colorado Springs woman pointed the FBI in the direction of Dickinson, the New York doll shop owner. She believed that Dickinson had forged her signature on one of the letters in vengeance because the woman had been late in paying for some dolls that she had purchased from the Dickinson shop. Based on investigations with Wallace and the other woman involved, all agreed in their suspicion that Dickinson was the suspect. Additionally, all four women had at one time corresponded with Dickinson regarding doll collecting. Typewritten letters between Dickinson and the women involved were identified by the FBI as having been used in the Springfield letter. Typewritten letters dealing with dolls received on past occasions by one of these women from Mrs. Dickinson were identified by the FBI with the typewriting on one of the letters that had been addressed to Buenos Aires. Thus, it was determined that Mrs. Dickinson's typewriter had been responsible for at least one of the letters to Buenos Aires. FBI investigation also disclosed that all four of the women whose signatures had been used on the Buenos Aires letters had corresponded in the past with Mrs. Dickinson concerning doll collections. An investigation into Dickinson's background indicated her involvement with Japanese organizations while living in San Francisco, as well as that after moving to New York. She had visited the Nippon Club and the Japanese Institute in New York, became a friend of the Japanese Consul General, and was an acquaintance of Ichiro Yokoyama, the Japanese naval attaché in Washington, D.C. Further investigation of the Dickinsons' activities from January to June 1942, the time frame in which the letters were sent, revealed that the couple had visited those areas, staying in hotels near the cities in question. The FBI was also able to determine that typewriters owned and made available to guests were used to compose the letters sent to Argentina. Continuing investigations disclosed that Dickinson had borrowed money from banks and business associates in New York up until 1941. However, in 1943, she was reported to have had in her possession a large number of $100 bills, four of which were traced to Japanese official sources that had received the money prior to the war. On the afternoon of January 21, 1944, Dickinson hurried into the Midtown Manhattan Bank. She feared that the FBI was watching her, and her immediate mission was to remove the contents of her safety deposit box in case she needed to make a quick escape. As soon as she opened the metal box, FBI agents who had followed her into the dimly lit vault announced that she was under arrest. The box contained $13,000, eventually traced to Japanese sources. A portion of the money had been in the hands of a Captain Yuzo Ishikawa of the Japanese Naval Inspector's Office in New York before being transferred to Dickinson. Dickinson told the agents that the money in the safe deposit box had come from insurance companies, a savings account, and her doll business, but in a subsequent interview, she claimed that she had found the money hidden in her husband's bed at the time of his death. She claimed that her husband had not told her the source of the money, but she believed that it could have come from the Japanese consulate in New York City. On February 11, 1944, she was indicted by a federal grand jury in the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of New York for violation of the censorship statutes, conviction of which could result in a maximum penalty of 10 years in prison and a $10,000 fine. She pleaded not guilty and was held in lieu of a $25,000 bail. A continuing investigation by the FBI resulted in a second indictment on May 5, this time on charges of violating espionage statutes, the Trading with the Enemy Act, and the censorship statutes, convictions of which carried the death penalty. She pleaded not guilty and was released on the same bail. On July 28, 1944, a plea bargain was made between the U.S. Attorney's Office and Dickinson, in which the Espionage and Trade Act indictments were dismissed, and she pleaded guilty to the censorship violation and agreed to furnish information in her possession concerning Japanese intelligence activities. Following her guilty plea, Mrs. Dickinson admitted to FBI agents that she had typed and prepared the 5 letters addressed to the individual in Argentina, and that she had used correspondence received by her from her customers to forge their signatures thereon. She claimed that the information incorporated in her letters was obtained through questioning innocent and unwitting citizens in the Seattle area around the Bremerton Navy Yard, the Mare Island Navy Yard in San Francisco, and from personal observation. She stated that the letters transmitted information about aircraft carriers and battleships damaged at Pearl Harbor, and that names of the dolls appearing in the letters referred to these types of vessels. She furthermore stated that the code to be used in the letters, instructions for use of the code, and $25,100 bills had been passed to her husband by Yokoyama around November 26, 1941 in her doll store at 718 Madison Avenue for the purpose of supplying information to the Japanese. She repeated her claims that the money had been hidden in her husband's bed until his death. However, an investigation by the FBI refuted those claims, disclosing that while Dickinson had been a friend of Yokoyama, her husband had never met him. It was also learned that a physical examination done on him at that time indicated that his mental faculties were impaired at that time of the supposed payment. As for Mrs. Dickinson's claim that the money had been hidden in her husband's bed until his death, both the nurse and the maid employed by the Dickinsons at that time emphatically stated that no money was concealed there. Dickinson was given the maximum sentence, 10 years at the Federal Correctional Institution for Women at Alderson, West Virginia, and a $10,000 fine. After serving 5 years, Eunice Kennedy, sister to future President John F. Kennedy, visited Alderson for a 6-week stay while doing research on ways to best help women prisoners adjust after they were released back into society. Eunice would have met most of the inmates while staying there, but she seemed to have taken a special interest in Dickinson. When Dickinson was quietly released from prison 3 years early on April 23, 1951, she immediately returned to New York where she worked for St. Vincent Hospital, a job Eunice arranged for her. She changed her name to Catherine Dickerson and maintained a friendship and secretarial relationship with Eunice Kennedy, attending her wedding in 1953. The next few years passed inconspicuously for Velvalee as she tried to live anonymously, and by the time she turned 70 years old, she simply vanished. Hey everyone! I just wanted to express how grateful I am that you took the time to listen to my narration. Hopefully you enjoyed it. I am Twisted Mind and please enjoy the rest of your day. Salamat!